Welcome, everyone. So thank you for joining us today. My name is Rosalind Hunter, and I'm a partner in the leisure, travel and transportation practice at Simon Kucher & Partners. I would like to welcome you to the International Luxury Hotel Association's webinar on revenge travel, how your hotel can respond and prepare. And we'd really like to thank Stay in Touch, who are sponsoring today's webinar as well. So first, to set the scene, what is revenge travel? After coronavirus shutdowns, cancelled vacation plans, and far too many hours sat at home, people working across the industry were starting to ask, right, are people going to travel again? Is this the new normal? Luckily, it started to become clear pretty quickly that people did not plan to spend the rest of their lives sat at home watching their televisions. And with savings growing and air miles waiting to be spent, we not only see people return to travel, but we also see people wanting to travel more and wanting to spend more. In Simon Kucher's latest travel trends study, we found that 45% of consumers were looking to actually travel more than they had pre-pandemic, and 34% also looking to spend more. This is revenge travel. Alongside that frequency and spend, there's also some changes to needs and behaviors that we're seeing. Some of them may be short-term due to the pandemic, and some may be longer-term. People are looking for more private transportation and also looking for more private and spacious accommodation when they get to the other end. Many are more also at this point in time looking to consider domestic travel just because of the uncertainty due to borders. Many more also not looking to just travel for vacations. The increase in hybrid working practice pretty much globally means that workations are rising. 43% of those who we asked, and this was a multi-country survey, had an interest in staying for an extra week after their vacation to work from that location and get some more benefits from being in that place. So that's just a brief overview of the revenge traveler. Now to jump into today's discussion with our panel of industry experts. So I'll just give a brief introduction, but hand over to everyone to introduce themselves as well. So we have Matt Barber, John Spears, Michael Heflin, and Daniel Tennant. So maybe first over to you, Matt, for a brief introduction.
Thanks so much, and thanks for the opportunity to be in the conversation today. My name is Matt Barber. I'm the Vice President of Operations with Charlestown Hotels. We're a boutique management firm that's been in business for 40 years, and we're based out of Charleston, South Carolina, but we've got 62 properties spread out throughout the lower 48.
John.
Good afternoon, I'm John Spears. I work with Sheila Johnson and Salamander Resorts. We're also a boutique hotel company. We've got 5 properties, primarily in the Southeast, and then we have a beautiful property in Jamaica. Glad to be here today.
Over to Michael.
Yeah, my name is Michael Heflin. Rosalind, thank you again for having all of us. Really looking forward to this conversation. I am the Chief Revenue Officer at Stay in Touch. Stay in Touch is the industry's leading cloud-based PMS system. So mobile first, trying to lead this technology revolution. That'll be part of the joy of this discussion here today. So thank you a ton for having us.
Super, looking forward to hearing more about that in the discussion. And finally, Daniel.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Daniel Tennant. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you again to Stay in Touch for hosting this great seminar with all these wonderful panelists. I am a partner and general manager of Aries Living Hospitality. We are effectively a startup management company, hotel management company. We've been in business for a year. We own and operate 4 hotels, 3 in Miami and 1 in Massachusetts.
Great. So to start off today's discussion, we obviously talked about the change in travelers' needs and behaviors. How are you seeing, both within your business and the wider industry, those travelers' needs and behaviors changing? Maybe to start off with Matt.
Yeah, sure. You know, I think that we've also seen just a change even in who that guest is. You know, from the onset of this, you may have had a property that leaned more corporate or saw a different demographic traveler that now have everyone just being locked in domestically, and once they were on the loose to be able to go somewhere and felt comfortable doing so, were maybe not your typical guest. And so there was some immediate need to identify that and sort of be present in public spaces and see who these folks were and what their needs were. And again, so if your property, you know, leaned towards catering towards the corporate individual, well, that's not what the leisure guest needs. And there may need to be some modifications there. But, you know, overall, I think we've seen almost everyone that is, from a leisure standpoint, looking for a sense of normalcy that as much as they want to know that, that the property or the hotels that there's resorts that they're staying at are following all the proper protocols, and they want to see that optically. And we don't mean, peppering things with stickers and distance signs, but more, that there's a frequency in which they see a staff member wiping down high touch areas, doorknobs, railings, handles, things like that. And obviously that there's a sense of cleanliness in their guest rooms, but it really is sort of that wanting to feel normal, and how we accomplish that in creative ways, and that their need for, you mentioned it earlier, maybe for some exclusive and private amenities and offerings and experiences that they could have. And then across different portfolios, we've seen, experiential travel and transformational travel, even though they were sort of on an uptick pre-pandemic, really skyrocket. And so the behavior leaning towards all of that sort of tells us where, people are where their changed public mindset is.
Yeah, I agree with Matt that people are looking for that sense of normalcy. They want to make sure the protocols are in place, right? And I think at the luxury level, we benefit from that, because I think there's an assumption right off the bat that we pay much closer attention to those types of details. But we are more obvious in our cleaning. Some things that might have been done overnight previously, we're doing in the day to, again, instill that sense of comfort and safety and awareness. But I think ultimately our customers are coming back because they're looking for that human engagement, that they've been missing, to move beyond the Zoom calls and actually see that friendly face, to reunite with family, to reunite with friends. And in many cases, just to see the familiar the face of the person that's checking them in at the resort that they've been coming to over and over again. To Matt's point, some are looking for a very private experience, and we're able to offer that. We've got villas and private homes down in Jamaica that come with their own chef, their own housekeeper, and a butler. They're tested beforehand. They wear masks. It's all contained. They have their own private pool. So families are able to come together that really are looking for that exclusivity, and we can meet those needs. But on the other end of the spectrum, there's others that they feel that they're vaccinated and it's time to get out and enjoy life like it was before. And they're not looking for social distancing. They are looking for energy and engagement. And I think in many respects, they're looking for a unique and special experience, and they're ready to buy up to that.
There's also a little bit with the staff in training them to be able to identify which individual you're engaging with, right? So when you take the sort of extremes or the scenario that John just described as to who is that, right? You've got the folks that have just never stopped traveling throughout all of this, and then you have those that are now vaccinated and just sort of peeking around the corner for the first time, and being able to have this team and the staff through dialogue and just even maybe body language pick up on who are you engaging with at that moment, so that you can best meet them where they're at and make sure you're making them feel comfortable the entire way through.
I think that's an interesting point you both brought up there, is about being more obvious in cleaning and then also in training. And now, what we're seeing is that we all as a company need to be much more prepared with our responses to those questions. It wasn't really a question that a lot of our guest service agents would be receiving. It says, what are your standard cleaning protocols? And, what chemicals are you going to be using? And what is the mask mandate during eating times and everything? And so I think, through this, all ships have sort of risen, and all of our team members are much more engaged and aware of actually the importance of cleaning pre-pandemic, post-pandemic, or during pandemic. It's been a really interesting time to train everybody on what the cleaning protocols is. And so we can answer those questions when our guests have them.
I think you also need to be flexible in your approach, because as we moved through the pandemic, we started to relax some of the protocols based on what was coming up from the CDC, and removed some screens and different things, and didn't mandate masking in certain areas. But with the new Delta variant that's come out, we just had a food festival that went on, that all of a sudden the sponsors and people that were involved were, what are you going to do that's going to be more protective than what you've done in the past, and groups are starting to come back and ask that same question. And so you have to be nimble and you have to adapt. So if you have a group coming in, then certainly we can make masked areas. We can, with our food festival, we mandated a negative COVID test to get your credentials to participate. We had on-site testing, and we did mandate for that entire group throughout the hotel for our employees and for the guests to be masked when they weren't eating or drinking. And what we found is that people were very flexible. I mean, they were appreciative of the fact that we were nimble and could adapt to their needs and make sure that their guests felt comfortable and safe.
Super. So obviously we're talking about that. Yeah, there's some nervous customers, there's some less nervous customers. We need to kind of adapt and adjust for all of those different points. Maybe thinking, we've talked a lot about the cleaning and in fact actually just bringing the cleaning out into the open, whereas historically people wouldn't want to see it, which is a strange way of thinking of the order of how things have gone. And that's obviously a lot of human interaction. Are you also seeing a shift more to the digital side in terms of how you can digitalize, reduce the touch points where feasible across the customer journey? Maybe over to John to start us off.
When the pandemic first broke out, we moved full force towards going digital and touchless and so forth. And we thought that was going to be the wave, that everybody was going to embrace that based on the news reports and the fear that was created in the 24-hour news cycle and so forth. What we have found is that it takes a while, first off, to get it all implemented, and then to have a central, bridge that brings all of the communication together to make sure that it's seamless. And that's still in process a year later to try to get that in place. In general, our customers have not embraced it. We primarily offer, we're a resort environment, and most of the guests that are coming in have lots of questions. They want to be orientated to the space and so forth. So while we have the technology, I think there's been few things that have been truly embraced, with the exception of the in-room ordering for room service, the ability to order a drink via your phone at the pool or on the beach because it saves time and efficiency. Guests opting to participate in the ability to communicate via text. Those types of things, I think our customer has embraced and will continue to do so as we move out of this pandemic, because it's convenient and it streamlines the process for them, makes service much more prompt and efficient.
We have, like John, have embraced the fully digital check-in experience. And, we were fortunate because we were relatively new as a management company. We weren't beholden to a lot of these sort of older legacy technologies. And so we've been able to engage with sort of the new age of modern hotel technologies that are all cloud-based, API integrations. They all interact beautifully. And our markets where we are specifically in Miami, specifically at our properties in Miami on Collins Avenue, where it's, certainly a little bit higher volume, a little bit more transactional, sort of get them in, obviously to a beautiful room and space, but just, quick in so they can go and enjoy the beach. They've really embraced that fully digital check-in experience. And I have over a 90% adoption to that pre-arrival check-in. They actually put in their IDs digitally. They put in their credit cards ID digitally. But I think what John was saying is that how long that takes to implement certainly takes time, and it is an iterative process. And so not only certainly you want to have the functionality be nailed, but now it's also about how does that communicate into the real world, and how do you get that information in advance to the guest to say, this is the digital check-in experience. Here's what you can experience over the next 3 days. So we've taken a lot of time and effort to put it onto our websites, make sure that there's a pre-arrival email explaining the process, and that everything that has been promised is then delivered in a digital world. And so then also for those guests who have not engaged with the digital check-in experience, we've worked very hard on property to make sure that the signage, that the directions, if they haven't engaged with the digital check-in experience, that they have that available to them. And so it is certainly a blend of, great, we've got the technology, but now how do we market that, and how do we ensure that the guests are using them to its full capability? Because in my opinion, it is a huge advantage. They can get, as we like to say, the boring stuff out of the way, so that once you arrive to the property, you can maximize your enjoyment time. At one of our other hotels up in Massachusetts, which is a bit more of a luxury resort environment, where we have an older demographic, we actually saw some really interesting results up there. because we had an older demographic up there and we thought the engagement would be certainly low. It's actually one of the highest engagement that we have, because, as we discussed a little bit earlier, is that, they're planners, so they look ahead and they check all of the emails. They make sure that, they're planning for their days and what their experience is going to be. And we didn't give them enough credit. They really do embrace the digital technology these days. So, which has been interesting for us to see.
So
Yeah,
actually a bit of a shift. So go ahead.
I was just going to say, I mean, we've seen some similar results and approaches, and we've said since early in the pandemic that, it was going to be an interesting way that our industry was going to navigate through this, since we are, we thrive on touch points and engagement, and touch points were no longer safe, and engagement had to be, measured in 6-foot distances. And so, it was how do we continue to do that and meet everyone's expectations while keeping everybody safe. And, digital was the natural go-to. And, there was sort of the proliferation of QR codes and online ordering and contactless check-in and all of that. And then it has been interesting to see across the different levels of property what the adoption rate or the, is of that, or how it gets embraced. And that's sort of in the luxury space of the properties that we have it. They wanted to be able to talk to people, right? And some of them, just by nature of what that property is, they are a frequent guest, right? Like they come with some relative frequency. And so this may be engaging with an employee that they haven't seen in over a year. And it's like, I want to see that person. I want to know how you're doing. I want to know how you made through it. And the staff were equally as interested in the guest. And then, we've got some properties that just geographically where they are or who they serve, it's a little more transient, a little more one and done, and that, the adoption rate's obviously higher. It's I don't have a connection to you yet. I may not get one on this trip because everything's been digitized, but they were teed up to be able to work a little better in that environment at that type of property. So you kind of see it all over, and you can't just rush to adopt something just because. I mean, you got to know who your audience is. What do they want? Is this going to be off-putting to them? Is it going to make things cumbersome and keep them at a distance when that just goes against everything that we would otherwise be training for or doing? But find that balance. And if this whole scenario has taught us anything, it's the amount of creativity and cleverness that came out of it. So there's clever ways to integrate it to continue to keep people being safe and let them engage to it, with it to the extent that they want to, and don't, not necessarily force things on them.
I think that's a very good point. It's not forcing, and each property has its own demographic, and it has, it's paying attention to that. And from a luxury perspective, that's what we do. We're trying to anticipate needs. We're not trying to force anything on anybody. We're listening, we're paying attention, and then we're delivering to their expectations. So I think that's how technology should be viewed.
Yeah, it's sort of an in addition to, sort of another option for the guests, rather than sort of forcing them into that method. Yeah.
Super. Maybe jumping over to Michael, you've obviously observed the transition, not just of one company, but of many of your time at Stay in Touch. What are the key trends that you're seeing in terms of what's been digitalized, what's not? I think we've had two quite extreme examples here, right? We've got some cases of very, very in-person, some very digitalized, and I'm sure a lot more in between. Is there a key trend, or is that the learning is very different across each?
Yeah, I think the latter. I think the learning of the last year, at least for us, right, from a technology, let's call it an intermediary perspective, right? Our job is to facilitate as seamless a connection as possible between staff and guest. And I think what we've really learned is every time we think we understand what guests want, we're probably only half right. And that really simplicity is the ultimate elegance, right? Like the easier we can make this to use for both the guest and the staff, the more we allow them to personalize what that interaction actually looks like. And, as I said earlier, I think every individual is truly an individual and falls somewhere independently on this spectrum of what they're looking for when they travel. And I've always, used myself as an example of this. I travel for business and for leisure, and I want totally different things depending on which of those I'm doing. And the most important thing is that I'm able to find a way to communicate those and have a staff that can be responsive to either one. Because sometimes I want a fully digital experience. If I'm traveling with my family, I've kind of got enough people around me and enough things to worry about. When I'm traveling alone for work, I want to share a beer with the bartender in the lobby, right? And like, I want to talk to the front desk staff and learn, I'm kind of a technology nerd. I want to learn what systems they're using and why, and do they like it? And so I think being able to have those discussions and being able to truly sort of personalize what this experience looks like really comes down to having a technology platform that enables that, right? And so that's really what we're focused on, because there is no right answer. I think, I love sitting back and listening to John and Daniel and Matthew talk about these things, because what you hear is it's different for everybody, right? There is no perfectly right answer. It's different for every different resort. It's different for every different traveler within those resorts. They all sort of are looking for, it may be degrees of separation, but there's some distinct requirement. And if we want to help them be more successful, then we've got to be able to be adaptive to every one of those responses. And so I think that that's been our takeaway. The digital revolution in some ways actually just means that I want to tell you in advance what I want to talk to you about when I get there, but I still definitely want to talk to you, right? It doesn't necessarily remove the human connection. Hopefully it helps to amplify the quality of that connection. And sometimes it does mean I don't want to talk to anyone or see anything. I'll always use the rental car example of this. The go straight to your car thing was a great idea, because frankly, when I need a rental car in Boston and I hate driving through that city, and it's a beautiful city, but driving through it is a mess. Like, I just got to get moving. So I think that we're all learning from each other as well, what people need, and more importantly, how best to facilitate the delivery of that request for service. That's been our major takeaway from the last 18 months.
There's another piece to it that has exploded, recently, or leading up in the last, 90 days or so is and I know it's not the main topic of today, but like the staffing piece, right? And so there's an element of this digital infusion that allows to relieve some pressure, or helps, if it use it to the hotel's advantage, to bridge the gap of some staffing shortages, right? And so where it makes sense and where it doesn't look like an afterthought, and where, making sure that it's not disjointed from the rest of the experience and just sort of plugging things, and that it's thoughtful in its approach, it can be helpful, right? Because that's the other piece to this. Even when we talk about, COVID and protocols and things, there are some modifications to amenities, services, offerings from the hotel that were made not because they keep you safe, but because we don't have the staff to, facilitate. It might appear like it right now is a little forgiving of a time, because it's under the guise of it's COVID, right? So everyone's lost as to, I used the example of transitioning a few properties the other week, and all of my questions, we would normally just through that transition of onboarding a property ask like a series of questions. But now it was sort of like, okay, is that how you did it pre-COVID? Is that because of COVID? Is that how you did it when you were fully staffed? Is that how you did it because you have no staff? And so everything is all this gray space now. And so we got to figure out when we come out the other side of it, or as we're coming through it now, what stays, what goes, where does the technology play a role in that? How much of it is because it's the right thing to do for that place, and how much of it is I don't really have a choice right now, and just making sure that I guess thoughtful is the right word. I mean, it just is a little bit of a street fight out there right now, and things are changing by the day. Let's mention I was in Chicago yesterday, and as I'm leaving, they're making announcements of that the statewide mask mandate going back in place. So there's this constant sort of adjusting. I won't use the bad word pivot, but there's this constant evolution of things, and every time you think you've got it, you're making another move, and so the technology, where usually people think of, I know someone mentioned this, but like technology as being this accelerated thing that happens quick. Right now, it takes a minute for it to catch up, right? And by the time it's caught up, we're moving again. And so I think that upward dialogue and back and forth with the technology companies and partners that we have, like stay in touch, is important, so that they can stay as nimble as we are and follow us on our journey and serve us where we need to be served.
Yeah, Matt, I think that's a very good point on the streamlining of through technology. And the example, Michael, that you had mentioned about the rental car, for somebody who travels all the time, that is the biggest benefit for me, to get off and get there and just grab my car and go. And I think that technology from a hospitality standpoint, and we can use that to eliminate these transactional interactions that require a lot of staff, and create a more seamless environment where you just walk out and you have what you need. I think that's where hotels can really benefit from that type of technology. And it will help us on the staffing side, as Matt said, because the staffing issues are real, they're global, and they're not going away anytime soon. So that's where I think technology can really step in and assist.
You know, John, and I think it's really interesting because, at least coming from the property management systems side, you know, historically, PMS systems were built, let's say, for management activities, right? And then we sort of leaned in a major way into this guest experience piece. The part of it that was maybe a little lost in that all was the staff itself, right? How do you actually facilitate the providing of service? And I think that Stay in Touch has been lucky to be, you know, very intuitive UI built, which, you know, frankly, we kind of got lucky because we built for the guest. And so we needed to make it as easy to use as possible. But that's really proven to be incredibly valuable in this new staff era, because it's not just staff shortages, it's also sort of a full generational change. So you've got a lot of people, you know, sort of leaving the industry and a lot of people coming into the industry. And so you need to be able to be really responsive to how quickly they can pick up the system. But again, most important is not the system. Like, I actually hate talking about staff in terms of the system. The most important thing is how that staff relates to the guest. The system just needs to get out of the way, frankly, right? And allow that staff member to provide as great of hospitality as possible. And I think that is a really good thing that's actually come out of this, is forcing our industry to be more responsive to what staff needs, so that they don't have to worry about the technology and they don't need to worry about management tasks. They need to worry about making sure that in this environment where guest needs are a little more hypersensitive, they're able to deliver against exactly what that is. It's been, I think, again, an overall really good thing, not only for us and where we happen to sit in the industry, but for the industry as a whole, as we've moved forward towards a much more staff empowerment focus. Not that we want to leave the management tasks behind. Those things need to happen, right? We're still trying to run businesses here. But at the end of the day, whether that guest comes back has nothing to do with how good your management tasks are. It has to do with how well you provide hospitality. And that's what we need to be focused on enabling.
Yeah, I think all of you guys bring some great points, but I want to just touch on the one Michael brought up there, was about using the technology to empower your frontline staff. And, you know, our training mandate has always been learn the technology, own the technology, understand the full capabilities of the technology, because the better and quicker you are with that technology, the more time, the more efficient you're going to be able to be with those guests. You know, Michael's system and Stay in Touch is phenomenal. There's a whole suite of different things, but you have to learn where to get there and how to best navigate taking a look at room availability, room rates, specials, promotions, adding in task managers, et cetera, et cetera. The better our staff are trained on these new technologies, the more empowered they are to service the staff and much quicker. So I think that's you know, a huge opportunity for us to train the staff on the technology to empower them to be able to service the guests fast. Another thing, though, is what's interesting in these days is, as we transition to the sort of the newer ages of technology, is the back end, you know, the back of house. During the pandemic, we've completely reimagined. We actually don't even have offices anymore. Our entire financial team works remote. Believe it or not, I have a director of IT who works remote. He can plug into any one of our systems in a web-based format and manipulate everything. And 99% of the time, Michael, you'll probably correct me, if the wiring is solid, you really just got to reset the certain button on the AP or what of the server, and the director of IT can do everything on the back end. We've also moved to, you know, using Slack and Google and some of these newer age platforms to create efficiencies at the back end and have a fully work from home. And it's crazy to think that you have a work from home staff in a hotel environment. It's very atypical. But, you know, leaning into these new technologies and using the great platforms like Stay in Touch and others, we're able to do that. And it creates some cost efficiencies for us as well, too, because I can have a financial controller running multiple properties rather than just one, you know, at each individual, taking up office space, among other things.
It's certainly, Oh, sorry, go ahead, John.
I was going to say a lot of people are moving in that direction, but for somebody who's in operations and it's all about touch, taste, feel, and connection, I find that at the luxury level, in particular, with so many different moving parts and so forth, having people work remote is really, it's a disconnect. And I think it keeps us from performing at the highest level. And so I'm looking forward to the day where we can bring people back together actually and build that teamwork, that camaraderie that you don't really get through a Zoom call or just logging in. So, each business is a little bit different, but for me on the luxury end, I think that human touch, just like it's important for our guests, it's important for us as employees, whether they're in the back of the house or the front of the house, and creating that cohesive approach.
John, I think that's really interesting because coming back to that, every guest needs something different. Frankly, so does all the staff. Like I think we've had great conversations with a lot of our partners, you all included, on we want to get people out of the office. Why you want to get them out of sitting in their office are totally different reasons. In some, it's because of exactly what you just said, John. It's because that's not where the guests are. The guests aren't sitting in your office in the back of the house, right? The guests are out in the hotel. And so you need to be out in the hotel. And so how do we create a technology platform or an ecosystem that allows you to be out in the hotel, actually interacting with guests and connecting with maybe guests, maybe staff, right? But either way, very present. Other roles, absolutely what it does is free up space, right? And enable you to, Daniel, I think you made a very good point. At least in our system, flipping between properties, if you're a super user, is literally as easy as clicking on the different tabs. It's like using a Google Chrome browser, right? You can just flip between hotels and be able to run financial management, do close, right? Review night audits across all your portfolio without a whole lot of extra lift. That's a really valuable thing to have, where you also don't need to be present at the physical server on the physical hotel to do that. So I think that flexibility, guest experience, and staff wise has really been a big focus for us. But that comes from you all saying that you need that flexibility because you need your staff to be able to be out and be present and not be tethered to a desk, whether that's because your guests are demanding it or because your systems or your business structure are demanding it. Either way, if we're doing this right as an entire technology ecosystem, right? I'm talking about the industry as a whole, making sure that people are spending time doing the things that are most valuable for their property is really the key here. And very rarely is that sitting alone in your desk in your office, right? Like that's just not where the best work gets done in hospitality.
Super. So I think some key learnings, right? That the robots aren't taking over. At least the robots won't be serving in John's hotels anytime soon. Using that tech.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but like John, you saw maybe in the news the other day that Elon Musk, like he's got this Tesla bot, right? Like this AI quasi-human little scary thing. And it was like, I did think, I wonder if they could clean rooms.
That would actually be fantastic because we have such a shortage in housekeeping. I would support that technology.
Okay, I stand slightly updated. The robots might be taking over certain parts of John's hotels and resorts, but the reality is really using technology to take away those chores and those tasks that didn't need a person to go and do them anyway, right? And allow people to get the things they want sooner, making the whole situation more efficient and using the people for being people rather than for order takers or shifting orders in between bars and restaurant tables, etc. And I think the other key point is, right, this is simplicity and it's choice. We're not talking about digitalization. We're talking about an omni-channel experience where people can choose where they want to be. And as Michael was talking about not wanting to talk to people on his leisure trips and wanting to talk on his business trips, I sat there and thought, I'm exactly the opposite of that. So, and I'm sure there's a few other ways and differences in between as well. Maybe just sort of going back to Michael again on that. So you've seen this sort of digitalization occur, the omni-channel experience being developed. Is there a blueprint for success? And what are really the common pitfalls that you see or the big learnings that you've seen over the last few years?
Oh, that's a great question. I actually think that we've heard John, Daniel, and Matthew all sort of touch on this. I really think that the pitfall we face is, for all of the benefits of technology, generally speaking, myself as an individual can be more adaptable immediately in the moment than technology can be, right? And so there is going to be a little bit of chasing. And I think that part of what we have to get right as an industry is understanding what has to be something that humans are responsible for and what is something that the systems can do, right? As we work through this sort of transition and responsive and adaptiveness, right? A lot of this comes to how well the full system works together. And like, at the end of the day, Daniel can turn around and yell to someone across the room, and it's pretty likely that that's going to be communicated correctly and it's going to get executed correctly. Technology systems, you know, as much as we'd like them to work that way, it's not that immediate, right? And so making sure that our systems can get as close to humanly possible as yelling across the room at each other and executing perfectly is where we've got to get to. I think that that really is the thing that will continue to push the industry forward, is the central hub being able to communicate effectively out in all the different directions. I used to work most of my career in technology, and we would do stand-ups every morning. And the irony of a stand-up is that's literally what it is, right? You all stand up, the person that's leading the scrum stands in the middle, and then you all update each other on what's going on. That's how our systems need to work, but that's a process, right? Unfortunately, we're not there yet in terms of it just being plug and play. We have systems that we are plug and play with, but the whole ecosystem doesn't work that way yet. And so I think continuing the path towards getting there and looking for individual hotels or hotel management groups or brands, et cetera, working on them optimizing their systems so that it is truly plug and play just creates so much more freedom and flexibility in the system. And so I think that's been one of our really big hyper focuses, is that if we're working perfectly, we're the scrum master and our stand-ups are effortless, right? But that's a process. It's not something, unfortunately, that we can just flip on. And we've certainly felt that as we've tried to keep up with the speed and adaptiveness that hoteliers have no choice but to deliver, right? You guys have to be, you have to be leading. We've got to make sure that we can keep up with that. And I think that's been a really major focus for us as we move through this period.
Super. And obviously everyone else has been sort of on the different journeys, be them digital and in person. And I mean, the journey is still going, right? We are not back to any normal, if there is a normal anymore, moving forward. In that sort of journey of how to make, I mean, it's not a human versus machine situation here, right? It is a how we make them work together. Have you really had any key learnings or things that you wish you could scream and shout to the rest of the industry so they don't repeat it as you did?
I think that's for the hoteliers. John, Daniel,
Yes.
Matthew, you guys got thoughts on this? That's you tell me, and then I'll go scream at the team and hope they deliver.
Screaming across the room is still just as effective, right though, Michael?
Still my preferred method of communication, I'll be honest. Slack is great, but I'd rather be
for us, again, being relatively newer as a company, I feel like it's just so important to explore and try new options and new things. There's so much new, interesting things out there. And what we've learned, is that there is no single way of doing it. And I think for a long time, there was sort of that ethos. And I think now migrating to some of these newer systems, and we've learned that the guests are surprisingly robust to some certain changes. Of course, there are some certain verticals where, of course, it's going to be, this is what it is, and that's more in the luxury end. But between the luxury end and the lower end, there is a lot of room for different interpretations and different methods of operating. And, you take a look at some of even these short-term stay rentals that are seeing some success. We did lose some of them, of course, during the pandemic, but you take a look at a Sonder, for example, and they've been having some great success. And so I think our eyes have been opened a little bit to different ways to service guests and different ways to run companies internally. And so that's one thing that we have, and my personal journey has been, is to break away from some of those standard templates and take a look at new ways of operating things. We're wrong a significant amount of time. There's no doubt about it. But we are trying new things, and the ones that we like, we certainly keep, and then we pivot and adjust. And so I think for anybody, who's kind of exploring or entertaining the idea of changing a few things, have an open mind. That's sort of what I would recommend.
That's a very good point, Daniel. And it takes a lot of different perspectives really to kind of take a look at a situation or how things are operating to evaluate how could we improve. We implemented a steering committee, a technology steering committee, actually during the pandemic. And we were bringing line level employees that were kind of in the mix on a daily basis, as well as department heads and then people at the corporate level to exchange ideas, talk about where some of the obstacles were. And then our approach was to find solutions to that and then get everybody to weigh in and to test the systems and so forth before we made a decision as we move, as we started making some pretty significant changes on the technology front. So I think that's very important. I think that technology is here. It's going to continue to evolve and we need to be aware of it. We can't turn our eyes away from it. But, how do you do it so it creates a more seamless work environment? To Michael's point, allows our employees, whether the front or back of the house, to do more human connection to ensure that we're creating these really exceptional experiences for our employees as well as our guests.
Yeah, I mean, we really learned to just not assume anything and to pay attention. I mean, conversations like this are important. So for folks to participate in that knowledge sharing, because we're all seeing different things across the board. And if we can find some common thread, or if there's something that's helpful to somebody else, these conversations are going to continue to need to happen. Like nobody, has the answers. And so it's just being present, it's paying attention, it's, identifying that there are, like, you don't want to be the blockbuster, right? Like where you make an assumption like, well, they don't want it. We know our guests, they don't want it. And it's like, well, maybe they do, I mean, we would have, we were having the conversation earlier about the more mature generation that you didn't think would adopt to certain technology or, digitization of things, and that you were surprised by how they were, right? And so that, who would have guessed, and so that sort of shutdown period forced them. It was the only way for that they could connect with the outside world, was doing that. And so that sort of thrust them into figuring things like that out. So when they are now interact with, some sort of transaction that requires them to be digital, they're a little more equipped to be able to do it. And so, and they may have start to prefer it, possibly. So it really is just not assuming anything, so that that as Netflix is coming out, you're not blockbuster, right? And it's not for everybody. And I think that especially on the luxury side of things, attended a different conference last week, and some of the conversations there just didn't apply to us in our portfolio, right? It was very branded, and they've got a different journey they're on and a different education that's taking place, and they're meeting their guests where they are, and they don't happen to be our guests. And so, but I did pick up on some things that we could do that are our version of that, right? Or at least inspired thought of, wow, we wouldn't think from that perspective, should we be? And even if the answer is no, right? Not yet. At least the dialogue's happening, that we're just paying attention to everything right now.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point, is just being aware of what's out there. You never know when it might come in handy or how you might apply it. I think back to last October, we do an annual Middleburg Film Festival. And all the films are indoors, and so all of a sudden we were like, what are we going to do? We're going to have to cancel. And we started thinking about it, and we just shifted, we pivoted, and we used technology. We did drive-in movies. And we were able to use technology where people turn on their radio and they can channel instead of having the speaker hang off the side of your car from the 70s, you're getting the music directly. We put food trucks out and so forth. So that was one way. But then also in the guest rooms, we were able to do subscriptions to all the movies. So if you stayed at the hotel, you could stream each of the movies that we were featuring in your room, and then we could customize a butler, 3-course dinner while you were watching the movies, and have a bar cart come by and mix drinks to your room. So had we not had a team effort on it and really understanding how technology works and how you can adapt, we very well might have canceled that event, but it allowed us to keep it going and actually create an experience that actually moving forward will stay with us.
That's great.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think one of those key themes that's coming through, right, is, and I have this a lot, right? A lot of clients come and say, what is the optimal answer? What is the right answer? And the simple fact is there is no one right answer to any situation. And if you spend your whole time trying to get to that one answer, you'll probably miss the boat and another answer would be needed anyway. This is about, and never have we had to adapt and adjust and test and learn. It might sound like cliched in terms of terms, but it's, what is the problem I need to address? And as John obviously has some pretty great answers to some of those adaptations, but as you keep going through it, what am I trying to address? Is this an absolute no-go? And obviously with some protocols, etc., it may be, but what is that thing I can do? Can I tweak? Can I adjust? And actually we're finding, particularly at the moment, right, customers are, as long as the experience is still great and the service is still there, look, I'm very willing to try and test different things and see how those are working out. So I think that would be my key kind of comment, is never think there is one right answer and there's one optimal approach, because in trying to find that, you will just, you'll end up somewhere else, but it won't be the optimal one. I think we're almost running out of time, maybe just as a kind of, we had some really great examples, and obviously everyone's been on a long journey over the last year or so, and slightly different journeys point to slightly different outcomes. I'm sure everyone else listening today as well as have different examples. Maybe just to close back to our panel, what would be your kind of one piece of advice, or is there another kind of example or case study you haven't shared yet that you think would be super helpful for everyone to hear? How do you prepare for that revenge traveler or whoever's coming after them?
I have very simple advice. Smile and wave. I think we need a lot more smiling, a lot more waving these days. So keep it simple. Just, be there, smile and wave. That's all I got.
Very important. I think that all of these protocols and systems and so forth, they really should be running in the background. And even if you're still wearing a mask, you need to make sure that that hospitality is coming through, because it's the guest engagement. That's what they're looking for. They want to know that these things are happening, and it creates a sense of security. But really, you have to be out front and realize that the reason that they're staying with you is that they're looking for that human connection. They're looking for great experiences. They're looking for creative new experiences, and that's going to continue. So it's inspiring, I think, for my team to not be operating in the status quo, but always looking at how you can improve and enhance the experience for the guests that resonates with them and gives them a reason to want to come back.
Yeah, I mean, if there's a positive out of this, and there are many, right? I mean, we do often look for the silver lining, is that it's quite literally one of the first times that we've all been in something together, right, globally, and so that the compassion piece doesn't get lost, right? And so that as you've got staff shortages and people are burning out, and you've got political beliefs on the other side, that if we can just boil it down to just remembering that we are all still in this together, and that there's a compassion piece that needs to be at the forefront of our approach to everything. We can meet them where they are from a technology standpoint, from a level of engagement and interest and all of that. But we need the employees to be there in order to do that. So there's a sort of a not just a change public mindset as it relates to hygiene and sort of protocols relative to COVID, but even from what we learned through all of this about our employees and what they're looking for and what they need from us, and some industry changes that need to happen on the backside, and technology is a part of that too. And so, just the compassion side of it from a guest perspective and the employees is something that.
Yeah, one other thing I'd like to add to what you said, Matthew, is that none of this happens right without your employees, and providing them the right level of support and the right level of training. To allow them to do their job. There's a lot of stress that's out there. All of the pandemic has created a lot of pent up frustration and anxiety and so forth. And it's incumbent upon us as leaders to make sure that our employees are able to diffuse those situations and not be in the middle of the conflict, but learn how to resolve it so that our guests can then relax and enjoy their stay. And I think that especially with fewer employees, that's a critical aspect of how we need to approach our employees and make sure that they have the support that they need to be successful and take them out of the firing line, right?
That's right.
Yeah, absolutely. I just wanted to say that, it's been so inspiring to listen to all of you guys and girls here just sharing your stories and the way that you've approached a lot of the problems we've all been experiencing over the last 18 months. And what I love the most is that we're really just, our North Star is always with the guest in mind. And we're just basically evaluating a whole new set of tools to empower our staff to deliver a great product. In whatever level you're in, which has been just a really great conversation for me. So thank you all for sharing your stories.
Super. I think it's safe to say we're really looking to use the systems and the computers to make the experience far more human rather than far more digital. And that's the trade-off that you've got to really keep in mind as we're preparing everything. Super. So thank you very much. So I'd like to close thanking everyone who's been listening in for the last 45 minutes or so. Thanks for joining this International Luxury Hotel Association's webinar series. And also thank you very much to the speakers today. It's been great listening to you. I kind of feel like we should just leave this going for a couple more hours and everyone could listen in, but I'm sure you have other places to be going to, but it's been really fascinating. So for those listening, if you found the webinar of value, the recording will be going up. So please do share that for others that may have missed the session today, so they could also get the great insight as well. The recordings of past webinars are all found on the ILHA's website, which is theilha.com under the events tab. So this will be up there shortly as well. So thank you very much, everyone, and have a great afternoon.